The black SUV rolled up my driveway at exactly 2 p.m., right on schedule. I watched from the kitchen window as Patricia Hendricks, HOA president, emerged with her clipboard like a weapon. Behind me, I heard the scratching. That familiar, ominous scratching. Casanova, no, I whispered, but it was too late. The Ostrich burst through the back door I'd foolishly left unlatched, his 6-foot frame charging toward the strangers on my property. Patricia's scream shattered the suburban silence. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this inspection would uncover far more than pool violations. It would expose the truth about who really owned this house, and why the HOA wanted me gone so desperately. Sarah Mitchell had exactly $43 in her checking account when the certified letter arrived. She knew what it was before she even opened it. The HOA never sent good news via certified mail. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," it began, and she could practically hear Patricia Hendricks's nasal voice reading the words aloud. "This letter serves as official notice that your property at 847 Meadowbrook Lane is scheduled for mandatory inspection on November 15 at 2 p.m. Recent complaints regarding your pool enclosure, livestock violations, and general property maintenance require immediate review." Sarah crumpled the letter in her fist. Livestock violations. They meant Casanova, the 7-year-old ostrich she'd inherited along with the house when her aunt died 6 months ago. "They can't make you get rid of him," her neighbor Tom said later that afternoon, leaning against the fence that separated their yards. "Your aunt had that bird for years. Grandfather clause or something. Patricia doesn't care about grandfather clauses." Sarah watched Casanova prance around the backyard, his powerful legs kicking up dust. "She wants this property. She's wanted it since before Aunt Linda died." Tom frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah hadn't told anyone the whole story. How her aunt's final months had been plagued by constant harassment from the HOA. How Patricia had shown up at the hospital, with purchase offers. How Linda had made Sarah promise to keep the house, to never sell to Patricia, no matter what. "My aunt owned this property outright since 1987, Sarah explained. "Before this neighborhood even had an HOA. When they incorporated in 2005, her property was technically grandfathered in for most of the new rules. Patricia's been trying to find loopholes ever since. So the inspection is her latest attempt to force me out." Sarah's jaw tightened. "If she finds enough violations, she can fine me into foreclosure. Then guess who swoops in to buy the property at auction?" Tom's expression darkened. "That's illegal." "Prove it." Sarah turned away from the fence. "I need to get that pool area cleaned up before Wednesday." But the pool wasn't the real problem, and Sarah knew it. The real problem was the property line dispute that had started 3 weeks ago. Patricia claimed that Sarah's fence encroached 18 inches onto HOA common property. Sarah had her aunt's original survey from 1987 showing otherwise. But Patricia had a new survey, commissioned and paid for by the HOA, that contradicted it. "Surveys can be wrong," Sarah's lawyer had said. "But fighting it in court will cost thousands." Thousands she didn't have. Sarah had depleted her savings moving across state lines to take possession of the house. Her job as a graphic designer was freelance, unpredictable. The inheritance had seemed like a blessing, a paid-off house, a fresh start. Now it felt like a trap. That night, Sarah sat at her aunt's old desk, sorting through documents. Linda had been meticulous, keeping records of every interaction with the HOA dating back to their incorporation. As Sarah read through the files, a pattern emerged. Patricia hadn't just wanted Linda's property. She'd wanted to punish her. In 2008, Linda had opposed Patricia's election as HOA president, backing another candidate. Patricia won anyway, by 3 votes. The harassment started immediately. Complaints about Linda's garden being unkempt. Citations for her car being parked incorrectly in her own driveway. A formal warning when Casanova escaped once and was found pecking at Patricia's roses. The documents painted a picture of systematic bullying spanning nearly 2 decades. Sarah found a folder labeled, "Legal, do not discard." Inside was a letter from a property attorney dated 2019. It outlined Linda's rights as a pre-existing landowner and confirmed that most HOA rules didn't apply to her property. There was also a handwritten note in her aunt's shaky cursive: "Patricia offered $340,000 today. I said no. She said I'd regret it. I won't sell. Not to her. Never to her." Below that, another note, dated just 2 months before Linda's death: "She knows about the easement. She's going to use it." Sarah's heart raced. What easement? She dug deeper into the folder and found a document from 1993, an easement agreement between Linda and the county for a drainage pipe that ran beneath the northeast corner of the property. It was standard, technical, forgettable. Except someone had attached a sticky note to it. The note read, "Check zoning laws, commercial access rights." Sarah grabbed her laptop and started researching. 2 hours later, she understood. The drainage easement didn't just affect Linda's property. It ran beneath what was now the HOA's community park, the crown jewel of Meadowbrook Estates, the thing Patricia bragged about in every neighborhood newsletter. If someone could prove the easement granted commercial access rights, they could potentially force the HOA to allow business traffic through the park. It would destroy the park's value. It would destroy Patricia's legacy project. And Linda had been looking into it right before she died. Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Ms. Mitchell?" The voice was smooth, professional. "This is Richard Gaines from Gaines Property Development. I understand you inherited 847, Meadowbrook Lane. I'm not selling. I'm not calling to buy. I'm calling to warn you." He paused. "Patricia Hendricks is not who you think she is. That inspection on Wednesday isn't about your pool. It's about removing you before you figure out what your aunt discovered. Who are you? Someone who lost property to Patricia's schemes 5 years ago. I'm willing to help you fight her. But you need to trust me, and you need to act fast." Sarah's mind spun. "Why would you help me?" "Because watching Patricia Hendricks lose would be worth every penny." His voice hardened. "Check your title documents. Look for any amendments filed after your aunt's death. I think you'll find something interesting." He hung up before Sarah could respond. She pulled up the county records database. Her hands shook as she typed in the property address. There it was. A lien filing, dated 3 weeks after Aunt Linda's funeral. The claimant, Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The amount, $47,000 in accrued fines and violations. Fines Linda had been fighting. Violations that were still under dispute when she died. Patricia had filed the lien while Sarah was still processing the inheritance paperwork, betting Sarah wouldn't notice until it was too late. And the inspection on Wednesday? That was Patricia's evidence-gathering mission to justify the lien in court. Sarah looked out the window at Casanova, sleeping peacefully in his shelter. Then she looked at the clock. She had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to turn Patricia's inspection into Patricia's worst nightmare. Sarah didn't sleep that night. By dawn, she'd made 17 phone calls, sent 42 emails, and consumed enough coffee to fuel a small marathon. The first call had been to Richard Gaines, who'd provided something unexpected, an entire dossier on Patricia Hendricks's HOA career. "She's done this to 4 other homeowners," Richard explained over the phone at 6 a.m. "Find a dispute, fabricate violations, file liens, force foreclosure, then either buy the property herself through an LLC or ensure it goes to someone who'll vote her way on the board. That's fraud. It's only fraud if you can prove intent. Patricia's careful. She always has just enough documentation to look legitimate." Richard's voice turned grim. "But she's gotten sloppy lately. Arrogant. I think we can catch her." "How?" "Let her do the inspection. But record everything. And I mean everything. Sarah spent Tuesday transforming her property into a surveillance operation. She installed 3 new security cameras with audio recording capabilities, all perfectly legal in her single-party consent state. She positioned them to cover every angle of the pool area, the backyard, and the front entrance. Then she called Tom over to witness her preparations. "You're setting a trap," Tom said, watching her adjust a camera angle. "I'm protecting myself," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" But Tom was smiling. "What do you need from me?" "Your presence tomorrow at 2 p.m. As a witness. And maybe." Sarah hesitated. "Maybe your expertise." Tom was a retired civil engineer who'd worked for the county for 30 years. He knew zoning laws, easement regulations, and property codes better than most lawyers. "I already pulled the original survey maps," Tom admitted. "From 1987, when Linda bought the place. Your fence is exactly where it should be. Patricia's new survey is off by 19 inches, not 18. Whoever she hired did a lazy job. Can you testify to that?" "In court?" "Absolutely." Tom's expression turned serious. "But Sarah, if you go to war with Patricia, she'll make your life hell. Even if you win. She already is making my life hell." Sarah gestured at the pool, which she'd spent all day scrubbing clean. "And I made a promise to my aunt. This house doesn't belong to Patricia. It never will." That night, Sarah found another document in Linda's files, a journal entry from 2023, just 8 months before Linda's death. "Patricia came by today with another offer. $385,000 this time. She said the neighborhood is changing, and that my property brings down values. She said it kindly, with that smile she uses, but I heard the threat underneath. She wants me gone. She wants Casanova gone. She wants every trace of the old neighborhood erased so she can build her perfect little kingdom. But this house has history. My late husband and I planted every tree in this yard. We built the pool with our own hands in 1989. Casanova was a rescue, a ridiculous bird that nobody else wanted, just like this property was unwanted land when we bought it. Patricia thinks she can erase history with money and paperwork. She's wrong." Sarah closed the journal, her resolve hardening. Linda had fought for 36 years to keep this place. Sarah could fight for one inspection. Wednesday arrived with overcast skies and a cold wind that made Casanova irritable. Sarah had locked him in his reinforced shelter with extra feed, double-checking the latch. The last thing she needed was the bird causing chaos before she was ready. At 1:45 p.m., Tom arrived, wearing a button-down shirt and carrying a leather portfolio. Looking official, Sarah noted. "If Patricia's bringing her clipboard, I'm bringing mine." Tom winked. "Let's make this interesting." At exactly 2 p.m., a black SUV pulled into Sarah's driveway. Patricia Hendricks emerged first, dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly budget. Behind her came 2 others, a thin man in his 50s carrying a camera, and a younger woman with a tablet. Sarah met them at the front door, her own phone already recording in her pocket. "Ms. Mitchell." Patricia's smile was glacial. "Thank you for accommodating today's inspection. This is Roger Chen, our HOA compliance officer, and Melissa Torres, our documentation specialist. And this is Tom Brennan," Sarah said, gesturing to her neighbor. "Retired county engineer. He'll be observing today's inspection to ensure accuracy." Patricia's smile tightened. "That won't be necessary. I insist." Sarah's voice was pleasant but firm. "Shall we begin?" The group moved to the backyard. Patricia immediately zeroed in on the pool. "The enclosure is damaged," she announced, pointing to a section of screening that had a small tear. Roger snapped photos. "That tear is from last week's storm," Sarah said calmly. "I have a repair scheduled for Friday. Would you like to see the work order? Patricia ignored her. The pool decking has cracks. Safety violation. Hairline cracks, typical for concrete that's 34 years old, Tom interjected. Within acceptable parameters for residential pools. I can cite the specific code if you'd like. Patricia shot him a look. Mr. Brennan, this is an HOA matter. Actually, Ms. Hendricks, since this property predates your HOA's incorporation, most of your regulations don't apply here. I have the legal documentation if you need a refresher. Sarah watched Patricia's jaw clench. This was going better than expected. The fence, Patricia said, pivoting. It encroaches on common property by 18 inches. We have a survey. I have a survey too, Tom said, pulling documents from his portfolio. Original survey from 1987, conducted by Harrison County's chief surveyor. The fence is precisely on the property line. Your survey is incorrect. Our survey is current. Your survey was conducted by Apex Property Services, Tom continued, a company that's been cited 3 times in the past 2 years for inaccurate measurements. The county doesn't accept their surveys for official disputes anymore. Patricia's face was reddening. Melissa, note that the property owner is being obstinate and refusing to cooperate with legitimate HOA governance. That's when Sarah heard it. The scratching. The rattling. The unmistakable sound of Casanova testing his shelter door. She'd locked it. She was sure she'd locked it. But the wind was strong, and the latch was old, and the shelter door burst open. Casanova emerged like a feathered missile, his long neck extended, his beady eyes fixed on the strangers in his territory. He let out a sound somewhere between a hiss and a roar. Oh my God, Melissa screamed. What is that? Livestock violation. Patricia shrieked, stumbling backward. Dangerous animal. Roger, document this. But Roger was already running. Casanova, interpreting the movement as a threat, gave chase. The ostrich's powerful legs ate up the ground in seconds. Roger dove behind the pool shed, camera abandoned. Casanova, heel. Sarah shouted, but the bird was in full territorial mode. Patricia tried to retreat to the house, but Casanova cut her off, circling around to block her path. She backed toward the fence, her clipboard raised like a shield. Call off your bird. Patricia demanded. He's not a dog, Sarah said, approaching slowly. And you're on his property. Casanova, come. The ostrich ignored her, advancing on Patricia with slow, deliberate steps. His head bobbed up and down, sizing up the threat. Patricia's back hit the fence. Casanova was 3 feet away. 2 feet. Casanova. Tom's voice boomed with unexpected authority. Stand down. The bird paused. Turned. Then, inexplicably, trotted over to Tom and nuzzled his hand. You have to be firm with him, Tom explained, scratching under Casanova's chin. He's protective, not aggressive. Big difference. Sarah stared. How did you? Linda used to let me feed him when she traveled. We're old friends. Tom smiled at the ostrich. Aren't we, buddy? Patricia was shaking with rage. That animal attacked us. I'm filing a dangerous animal report with the county. Your compliance officer entered the bird's territory and made threatening gestures, Tom said mildly. Any animal would respond defensively. It's actually your team who violated County Ordinance 47B about disturbing livestock on private property. This is residential zoning. With agricultural exemptions for properties established before 2000. Linda Mitchell filed for and received that exemption in 1998. It's transferable to heirs. Tom pulled another document from his seemingly endless portfolio. I have the paperwork right here. Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Then she grabbed her clipboard and jabbed a finger at Sarah. This inspection is over. You'll be receiving our full report, along with citations for multiple violations. The total fines will exceed $40,000. And when you can't pay, and you won't be able to pay, this property will be foreclosed and sold at auction. Actually, Sarah said quietly, I don't think it will. She pulled out her own phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward Patricia. I've been recording this entire inspection. Including the part where you admitted your goal is to force foreclosure. And the part where your team violated county ordinances regarding livestock. And, most importantly, the part where you trespassed into a clearly marked animal enclosure without permission, provoking a defensive response. Patricia's face went white. You can file your report, Sarah continued. But I'll be filing my own with the county, along with a formal complaint against the HOA for harassment and fraudulent lien filing. I've also sent all of Linda's documentation about your 20-year campaign against her to a property rights attorney. He's very interested in the pattern. You can't prove. I can prove you filed a $47,000 lien 3 weeks after my aunt's funeral for violations that were still under legal dispute. I can prove your new survey is fraudulent. And I can prove you just admitted, on camera, that your intention is to force this property into foreclosure. Sarah's voice stayed calm, but her eyes were steel. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw that lien. You're going to issue a formal apology for the survey error. And you're going to leave me and my property alone. Forever. Or what? Or I go public. Every homeowner in this development gets a copy of what I've found. Every media outlet in the county gets the story of how the HOA president has been running a foreclosure scheme for years. And every property owner you've already forced out gets contacted by my lawyer about a class action lawsuit. Patricia's hands were shaking. You're bluffing. Sarah made another call, putting it on speaker. Richard Gaines's voice filled the yard. Ms. Hendricks, this is Richard Gaines. I'm currently sitting with 4 other former Meadowbrook residents who lost their properties to HOA foreclosure between 2018 and 2023. We're all very eager to hear what you have to say in your defense when this goes to court. Patricia looked at Sarah, at Tom, at Casanova still standing guard, at the cameras she'd only now noticed positioned around the yard. Then, without another word, she turned and fled to her SUV. Roger and Melissa scrambled after her. The black SUV peeled out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on Sarah's concrete. Tom let out a long breath. Well. That happened. Sarah's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on the pool deck, adrenaline making her hands shake. Did I just declare war on my HOA? No, Tom said, settling beside her. You just won it. Casanova, sensing the danger had passed, wandered over and plopped down next to Sarah, resting his head on her knee. For a ridiculous bird, he had surprisingly good timing. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Richard Gaines, lien withdrawn. Check county records. You're clear. She checked. He was right. The $47,000 lien had been removed from her property title. It's over, Sarah whispered. But she was wrong. It wasn't over at all. It was just beginning. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. the next morning, and it made Sarah's coffee go cold in her hand. Dear members of Meadowbrook Estates, it began. It is with deep regret that I must inform you of serious allegations made against our HOA board, specifically regarding property acquisition practices and lien filings. In the interest of transparency, I am attaching documents that detail these concerns. An emergency meeting has been called for Saturday, November 18th at 10 a.m. in the community center. All homeowners are urged to attend. Robert Tillman, HOA board member. Below the message were PDFs, dozens of them. Property records, lien documents, email exchanges Sarah had never seen before. Someone had leaked everything. Her phone rang. Tom. Did you see? I saw, Sarah said. Did you send those documents to the board? Not me. But I'm guessing Richard Gaines has friends in interesting places. Tom paused. Sarah, this is going to get ugly. Patricia won't go down quietly. He was right. By 9 a.m., Sarah's doorbell had rung 6 times. Neighbors she'd never met wanted to talk. Some were angry, at Patricia. Others were angry at Sarah for causing trouble. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down actually hugged her and cried about losing her son's treehouse to a safety violation fine she couldn't afford. Patricia made us tear it down, Mrs. Chen sobbed. My son was 8. He's 17 now, and he still talks about that tree house. She said it violated setback requirements, but it was in our backyard. Our own backyard. By Friday evening, the neighborhood was divided. Half the residents were demanding Patricia's resignation. The other half, mostly newer homeowners who'd bought in the last 5 years, insisted she was being railroaded by a disgruntled property owner who refused to follow rules. Sarah stayed home, watching the drama unfold on the neighborhood Facebook group. The comments section was a war zone. Then, at 8 p.m., her doorbell rang again. She almost didn't answer. Patricia Hendricks stood on her porch, alone. No SUV. No clipboard. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 days. May I come in? Patricia's voice was hoarse. Every instinct told Sarah to slam the door. But something in Patricia's expression stopped her. The woman looked broken. 5 minutes, Sarah said. They sat in Linda's living room, the same room where Sarah's aunt had probably sat through dozens of uncomfortable conversations with this same woman. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. I didn't come to apologize, Patricia said. You won't believe anything I say anyway. Then why are you here? Patricia stared at her hands. Because you're going to destroy me, and I wanted you to understand what you're destroying. Sarah waited. I was the first person to move into Meadowbrook Estates, Patricia continued. 1989, before the development was even finished. I was 32, divorced, starting over. This neighborhood was supposed to be my fresh start. I watched it grow, house by house. I knew every family. I organized the petition to create the HOA because I wanted to protect what we'd built. By bullying people out of their homes. By maintaining standards. Patricia's voice hardened. Do you know what happens to property values when someone lets their yard go to hell? When they park broken cars in driveways? When they keep livestock in residential zones? My aunt's property wasn't. Your aunt was a symbol, Patricia interrupted. A symbol of everything I was trying to prevent. The old guard refusing to adapt. The resistance to progress. She looked up, and her eyes were blazing. I built this neighborhood into something valuable. Something cohesive. And yes, I pushed out people who wouldn't cooperate. I make no apologies for that. You destroyed lives. I protected property values. Those 4 people Richard Gaines found. One of them was running an unlicensed dog breeding operation. One had 15 cars on their property, most not working. One had converted their garage into an apartment they were renting illegally. And one, Patricia's voice cracked. One was my son. Sarah blinked. What? My son Derek bought a house here in 2018. He was struggling with addiction. Alcoholism. I thought if he was close, I could help him. But he let the property deteriorate. He violated every rule. He wouldn't accept help, wouldn't get treatment. The HOA board, my own board, voted to fine him. I recused myself, but they did it anyway. He couldn't pay. He lost the house. Patricia's hands were shaking. He blamed me. He doesn't speak to me anymore. Sarah didn't know what to say. So yes, Patricia continued, I became ruthless. Because being kind didn't work. Being understanding didn't work. Rules work. Standards work. Order works. She stood up. But you've painted me as a monster, and maybe you're right. Maybe somewhere along the way, protecting the neighborhood became punishing anyone who didn't fit my vision. It did, Sarah said quietly. And you tried to do the same thing to me that you did to your own son. Patricia flinched. Your aunt, Linda, she reminded me of everything I'd failed at. She kept that ridiculous bird and that aging house and she was happy. She didn't care what anyone thought. She didn't care about property values or appearances or fitting in. And everyone loved her for it. Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. I was jealous. Of a woman with an ostrich and a cracking pool deck. How pathetic is that? Sarah wanted to stay angry. She wanted to keep Patricia as the villain in this story. But the woman standing in her living room wasn't a villain. She was broken, lost, and trying desperately to control a world that had spun away from her years ago. What happens at the meeting tomorrow? Sarah asked. I'll be asked to resign. I'll resign. Robert Tillman will become interim president. The board will vote to void all outstanding liens filed in the past 5 years. Your property, and everyone else's, will be reviewed under the original 2005 bylaws, which are much less restrictive. Patricia moved toward the door. You'll get your fresh start. I'll get what I deserve. Patricia. The woman turned. My aunt wrote about you in her journal, Sarah said. She said you were scared. Scared of change, scared of losing control, scared of becoming irrelevant. She felt sorry for you. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She should have hated me. She probably did, sometimes. But she also understood you. Sarah stood up. For what it's worth, I think you did care about this neighborhood. You just forgot that neighborhoods are made of people, not property values. Patricia nodded once, then left. Sarah watched through the window as the woman walked down the street, not to a car, but on foot, her shoulders hunched against the November wind. Tom appeared at Sarah's door 10 minutes later. I saw Patricia leave. Everything okay? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I think I just had the most honest conversation of my life with someone I thought I hated. Want to talk about it? Tomorrow. After the meeting. Sarah managed a smile. Right now, I need to feed Casanova and figure out what the hell I'm going to say to a room full of angry homeowners. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. This started with my aunt. It ends with me. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures cold enough to frost. Sarah dressed carefully, professional but not intimidating, approachable but not weak. She settled on jeans and a sweater, her aunt's silver necklace around her neck for courage. The community center was packed. Every seat taken, people standing along the walls. Sarah slipped in the back, trying to be invisible. Robert Tillman stood at the front, gray-haired and stern. He called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss serious allegations against our HOA president, Patricia Hendricks. Before we begin, I want to note that Patricia submitted her resignation last night, effective immediately. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some applauded. Others looked shocked. However, Robert continued, resignation doesn't address the underlying issues. We need to discuss how to move forward. A woman in the third row stood up. I want my money back. Patricia fined me $8,000 for a fence that was 2 inches too tall. 2 inches. I lost my home, a man shouted from the back. Because of trumped-up violations. I want restitution. The room erupted. Everyone talking at once, angry voices overlapping. Robert banged a gavel, but no one listened. Then Sarah heard herself speak. Not loudly, but clearly. This isn't about revenge. The room quieted. People turned to look at her. Sarah walked to the front, her heart hammering. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I inherited 847, Meadowbrook Lane from my aunt, Linda Mitchell. Patricia Hendricks tried to force me out using fraudulent liens and manufactured violations. She would have succeeded if I hadn't had help. She looked around the room. But I've learned something this week. Patricia Hendricks isn't evil. She's scared. She's a person who confused control with care, who thought strict rules would create community. She was wrong. But destroying her won't fix what's broken here. So what do? Someone called out. We rewrite the rules, Sarah said. We go back to what HOAs are supposed to be, neighbors helping neighbors, not boards punishing residents. We establish clear appeals processes. We require transparency. We limit the board's power to fine and foreclose. And we acknowledge that this neighborhood has history that predates these rules. People like my aunt built this place. Their legacies deserve respect. Mrs. Chen stood up. I second everything Sarah just said. And I nominate her for the board. I don't want, Sarah started. I third it, Tom called from the doorway, grinning. The room buzzed with voices. Robert banged his gavel. All in favor of adding Sarah Mitchell to the ballot for the next board election. A forest of hands rose. Motion carries. Robert smiled. Welcome to HOA politics, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah sat down, dizzy. She'd come here to defend herself. She was leaving with a nomination to join the very organization that had tried to destroy her. After the meeting, as people filed out, an older man approached her. He had kind eyes and calloused hands. Frank Morrison, he introduced himself. I knew your aunt well. Linda would be proud of what you did today. Thank you. There's something you should know. Frank lowered his voice. That easement Linda was researching before she died. The one running under the park. Sarah's attention sharpened. What about it? I was the county engineer who approved it in 1993. The language in that easement is, let's say, unusual. Linda asked me about it last year. She thought it might give her leverage against the HOA. What kind of leverage? Frank glanced around, then pulled out a folded paper. This is a copy of the original easement agreement. Read Section 4B. Then call me if you have questions. He handed her his card. Your aunt was onto something big, Sarah. Something that could change everything about how this HOA operates. She died before she could use it. But you could. He walked away, leaving Sarah holding the paper like it might explode. She unfolded it right there in the parking lot, scanning the dense legal text until she found Section 4B. Her breath caught. If she was reading this correctly, if the language meant what she thought it meant, then the drainage easement didn't just grant the county access rights. It granted the original property owner permanent veto power over any commercial development within 50 feet of the easement path. And the HOA's community park, their pride and joy, their biggest asset, sat directly on top of that easement path. Which meant Linda, and now Sarah, could legally block any attempt to develop, modify, or monetize the park. The park Patricia had spent 15 years and hundreds of thousands of HOA dollars creating. The park that was currently being evaluated for a lease deal with a private events company that would bring in $200,000 annually for the HOA. Sarah looked up at the community center, where Robert Tillman was locking the doors. She had leverage. Real, legal, ironclad leverage. The kind that could reshape the entire power structure of Meadowbrook Estates. The question was, what was she going to do with it? Part 4. Sarah spent the weekend buried in property law. The drainage easement was a legal labyrinth, technical language layered over decades-old zoning codes, with amendments and addendums that contradicted each other in subtle ways. But the more she read, the clearer it became that Frank Morrison was right. Section 4B granted the original easement grantor, Linda Mitchell, and any successors, irrevocable consultation rights regarding all structural, commercial, or developmental modifications within the designated buffer zone, defined as 50 feet radial from any point of the easement path, until such time as the easement is formally dissolved or rendered obsolete by municipal rezone. In plain English, Sarah could veto any commercial use of the park. The events company lease, which Robert had mentioned during the meeting, was worth $200,000 annually to the HOA. That money was supposed to fund long overdue infrastructure repairs, reduce homeowner dues, and finance a new playground. Blocking it would make Sarah public enemy number one. But there was more in the documents Frank had given her. A letter from 1993, from Linda to the county engineer, a younger Frank Morrison. Dear Mr. Morrison, it read. Thank you for explaining the easement terms. I understand that by granting the county access, I'm also securing certain protections for the surrounding land. My husband and I intend to keep this property in the family for generations. We don't want to see it swallowed by commercial development or HOA overreach. If this easement provides that protection, then I'm grateful for it. Linda Mitchell. Linda had known exactly what she was doing. She'd built a legal shield around her property 30 years ago, anticipating conflicts that wouldn't emerge for decades. Sarah's phone rang Monday morning. Robert Tillman. Sarah, we need to talk, he said without preamble. Can you come to my office this afternoon? What's this about? The park lease. I've been reviewing the property records, and something's come up that involves your aunt's land. I'd rather discuss it in person. So he knew. Or at least suspected. Sarah agreed to meet him at 3 p.m. She spent the intervening hours consulting with 2 different property attorneys, both of whom confirmed her interpretation of the easement. She had the leverage. The question was how to use it. Robert's office was in his home, a pristine colonial at the development's north end. He welcomed Sarah with coffee and a weary smile. Let me guess, Sarah said as she sat down. You found the easement clause. Robert nodded. My lawyer flagged it this morning when reviewing the park lease contract. The events company's attorneys will find it too, eventually. When they do, the deal falls apart unless you sign a waiver. Which I'm not going to do. Sarah. Robert, that park was built on a power play. Patricia used HOA funds to create something that increased property values and her own prestige. She did it without consulting the original landowners, including my aunt, who had legal rights to block it. Now you want me to waive those rights so the HOA can profit from something they never should have built in the first place. Robert set down his coffee. I understand your anger. Patricia's methods were questionable at best. But the park exists now. Families use it. Kids play there. Blocking this lease doesn't hurt Patricia, she's already gone. It hurts the community. The community that stood by while Patricia harassed my aunt for 20 years. The community that just voted to reform the HOA and nominated you for the board. Robert's voice was gentle but firm. You're right to be angry. You're right to demand accountability. But using this easement as a weapon makes you just like Patricia, someone who puts personal grudges above community welfare. Sarah wanted to argue. But Robert's words hit hard because they were true. What do you want from me? She asked. Negotiation. Not capitulation. Robert pulled out a folder. I've drafted a proposal. You signed the waiver for the park lease, but in exchange, the HOA agrees to several conditions. First, all liens filed during Patricia's tenure are reviewed by an independent third party. Any that are deemed excessive or fraudulent are voided, and the affected homeowners receive restitution from HOA funds. Sarah leaned forward. Keep going. Second, the HOA bylaws are amended to require board approval for any fines exceeding $500, with mandatory appeals processes. Third, properties that predate the HOA incorporation, like yours, receive formal exemptions from most architectural and livestock regulations, codified in the bylaws so no future board can overturn them. And fourth? Robert smiled. The park gets renamed Linda Mitchell Memorial Park, with a plaque crediting her as the original landowner who made it possible. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You'd do that? Your aunt was part of this neighborhood's foundation. She deserves recognition, not erasure. Robert slid the folder across the desk. This isn't about winning or losing, Sarah. It's about finding a way forward that honors the past while building something better. Sarah read through the proposal. It was thorough, fair, and more generous than she'd expected. It gave her almost everything she wanted without destroying the community in the process. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. But the events company needs an answer by Friday, or they'll move to another venue. Sarah left Robert's office with the folder under her arm and chaos in her mind. She drove to the park, the disputed, controversial, beloved park that sat atop her aunt's easement. Children were playing on the swings. A couple sat on a bench, watching the sunset. An elderly man threw a tennis ball for his dog. None of them knew that their park's future hung on a decision Sarah hadn't made yet. She sat in her car, watching the scene, and pulled out her phone. She needed perspective. Tom answered on the first ring. What's wrong? Robert offered me a deal. She explained the proposal. Tom was quiet for a long moment. What does your gut tell you? That my aunt would take it. That she'd want the park to stay, but only if it came with real change. Then you have your answer. But what if I'm wrong? What if this is just another way for the HOA to manipulate me? Sarah. Tom's voice was patient. You're not Linda. You don't have to fight the same battles she fought. You can choose your own path. After they hung up, Sarah sat with those words. She wasn't Linda. She didn't have 30 years of conflict shaping her decisions. She had a choice her aunt never got, to negotiate from a position of strength, with a community that was actually listening. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I heard about the easement. Don't trust Robert. He's Patricia's puppet. Use your leverage and burn the whole thing down. Derek Hendricks. Patricia's son. The one she'd mentioned, the one who'd lost his house. Sarah stared at the message. Derek's anger made sense. He'd lost everything, blamed his mother, blamed the HOA. He wanted revenge. But revenge wasn't justice. And Sarah didn't want to become Derek, bitter, isolated, defined by what had been taken from him. She typed a response, I'm sorry for what happened to you. But I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for change. She didn't wait for his reply. Instead, she called Robert. I'll sign the waiver, she said when he answered. But I want 2 additional conditions. I'm listening. First, Derek Hendricks gets restitution for his lost property. Full amount of what he owed when it was foreclosed, plus interest. The HOA pays it, no arguments. Robert hesitated. That's significant. But I think I can get the board to agree. What's the second condition? I want Patricia Hendricks to be at the park dedication ceremony. I want her to see Linda's name on that plaque. And I want her to hear me say publicly that both of them, Patricia and Linda, helped build this community, even if they did it in very different ways. Why would you do that? Because someone needs to break the cycle of grudges and retribution. Because my aunt would want grace, not cruelty. And because Patricia's already lost enough. Robert's voice was thick with emotion. Your aunt would be very proud of you. I hope so, Sarah said. Because I'm terrified I'm making a huge mistake. But when Friday came, Sarah signed the waiver. The events company lease went forward. The HOA board unanimously approved all of Robert's conditions, including Derek's restitution payment. The park dedication was scheduled for the first Saturday in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. Sarah didn't tell Patricia about the invitation. She simply had Robert include her on the email blast about the ceremony, along with every other resident. She didn't know if Patricia would come. The night before the dedication, Sarah found one final document in Linda's files, a sealed envelope with Sarah's name written on the front in her aunt's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Dear Sarah," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're dealing with the house and all its complications. I'm sorry for that. I should have made things easier. But I've learned that easy things rarely matter, and hard things are where we find out who we really are. Patricia Hendricks will probably make your life difficult. She's made mine difficult for years. But here's what I've learned, she's not evil. She's scared. Scared of change, scared of losing control, scared of being forgotten. The house, the bird, the easement, these aren't about property. They're about memory. About refusing to let the past be erased. Whatever you decide to do with the easement, know that I trust you. You're strong in ways I never was. Use that strength to build bridges, not walls. Love always, Aunt Linda." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Tomorrow, she'd honor her aunt's memory. And maybe, just maybe, she'd help heal a neighborhood that had been at war with itself for too long. But first, she had to feed a very impatient ostrich who was scratching at the back door, demanding dinner. Some things, at least, never changed. Part 5. The morning of the dedication ceremony arrived cold and bright, the kind of December day where frost clung to grass and breath misted in the air. Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to decide if the dress she'd chosen was too formal for a park dedication or not formal enough for what might be her last public appearance before she became a social pariah. Because despite Robert's optimism, Sarah knew that not everyone supported her decision. Derek Hendricks had sent 3 more texts, each angrier than the last, calling her a traitor and a fool. The neighborhood Facebook group had split into factions, those who praised her compromise and those who called it a sellout. And Patricia hadn't responded to the invitation at all. "You look fine," Tom said when she opened the door at 9:30 a.m. He was wearing slacks and a sweater, looking more put together than she'd ever seen him. "Stop fussing. What if no one shows up? Then we'll have a very private ceremony with excellent refreshments." He held up a bag. "I made cookies." Sarah laughed despite her nerves. "You made cookies for a park dedication?" Linda's favorite recipe. Snickerdoodles. Seemed appropriate. They drove to the park together, arriving 30 minutes early. Workers were setting up folding chairs around a covered object in the center of the green, the plaque, presumably. A small podium stood nearby. Robert was directing traffic, looking harried but pleased. "Good turnout," he called to Sarah. "We've got about 100 RSVPs. Anyone I should be worried about?" Derek Hendricks confirmed he's coming. Demanded speaking time. Robert grimaced. "I couldn't exactly say no given the circumstances. I slotted him for 3 minutes after your remarks." "Great." Sarah's stomach churned. By 10 a.m., the folding chairs were filled and people lined the walking path. Sarah recognized neighbors she'd met during the past 2 weeks, Mrs. Chen with her now-grown son, the couple who'd lost their fence to HOA fines, the elderly man she'd seen walking his dog. Frank Morrison sat in the front row, giving her an encouraging nod. Patricia wasn't there. Robert began the ceremony with a brief history of the park's creation, carefully avoiding mention of the conflicts that had surrounded it. He spoke about community, shared spaces, and the importance of honoring those who'd built the neighborhood. Then he introduced Sarah. She walked to the podium on unsteady legs, her prepared remarks feeling suddenly inadequate. 100 faces looked back at her, some friendly, some skeptical, some openly hostile. "I didn't know my aunt very well," Sarah began, abandoning her notes. "Linda Mitchell died before I really understood what this place meant to her. I inherited her house, her ostrich, and apparently, her fight with the HOA. For a while, I was angry about that. Angry that she'd left me with problems instead of simple answers. She looked out at the crowd. But I've learned something these past few weeks. Linda wasn't fighting against this community. She was fighting for a version of it that made room for history, for eccentricity, for the messy reality of people's lives. She wanted a neighborhood, not a corporation. She wanted neighbors, not compliance officers. Movement at the back of the crowd caught her eye. Patricia Hendricks, wearing a simple navy coat, had slipped in during Sarah's speech. Their eyes met. Patricia looked terrified. Sarah made a decision in that moment. This park exists because of two women, she continued. Linda Mitchell, who owned the land and granted the easement that made it possible. And Patricia Hendricks, who organized the fundraising, managed the construction, and poured years of her life into creating this space. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia's eyes widened. They didn't agree on much, Sarah said. They spent decades at odds over rules, regulations, and what this neighborhood should be. But they both cared deeply about this place. They both wanted it to thrive. They just had different ideas about how to make that happen. She stepped away from the podium and walked to the covered plaque. This park is being renamed Linda Mitchell Memorial Park, in honor of my aunt's legacy. But I've asked for a second dedication as well. Sarah pulled the covering away. The bronze plaque gleamed in the winter sunlight. It read, Linda Mitchell Memorial Park. Dedicated December 2025. In honor of Linda Mitchell, 1951 to 2024. Original landowner and community pillar. And Patricia Hendricks. Founding president, Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Who built this space for all to enjoy. Neighbors may disagree, but community endures. The crowd was silent. Sarah looked at Patricia, who had tears streaming down her face. Community isn't about agreeing on everything, Sarah said, returning to the podium. It's about finding ways to live together despite our differences. It's about recognizing that the person you're fighting might love this place just as much as you do. It's about grace. She sat down. The applause started slowly, then built. Not everyone was clapping. Sarah could see several people with arms crossed, faces hard, but enough were that it felt like acceptance. Robert returned to the podium and called Derek Hendricks. The man who approached was younger than Sarah expected, maybe 35, with Patricia's sharp features and Linda's defiant eyes. He looked at his mother, looked at the plaque, looked at the crowd. I was given 3 minutes, Derek said, his voice tight. I was going to use them to talk about how the HOA destroyed my life. How my own mother stood by while I lost everything. How this community chews people up and spits them out. Patricia flinched. But then I saw that plaque. Derek's voice cracked. And I realized something. My mother didn't put her name on it. Sarah did. Sarah, who had every reason to hate Patricia, chose grace. Chose recognition. Chose to see the good alongside the bad. He turned to Sarah. I got the restitution check yesterday. $42,000. Enough to pay off my debts and start over. I didn't deserve that. I screwed up. I let addiction destroy my life, and I lost my house because of my own failures. Derek, Patricia started. Let me finish. Derek looked at his mother. You were trying to help me the only way you knew how. By enforcing rules. By maintaining order. I hated you for it. I blamed you for my failures. But seeing Linda Mitchell's name up there, next to yours, made me realize something. You both loved this place. You just showed it differently. And maybe I need to learn that loving something doesn't mean agreeing with how it's run. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Patricia. The crowd held its breath. Derek hugged his mother. Patricia collapsed into her son's arms, sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Me too, Mom. Me too. Sarah felt tears on her own cheeks. Tom handed her a tissue. Robert let the moment sit, then gently concluded the ceremony. As people filtered toward the refreshment table, Sarah found herself surrounded by neighbors wanting to talk, to thank her, to ask questions about the changes coming to the HOA. Frank Morrison pulled her aside. "Your aunt would have loved this." "You think so?" "I know so." Linda understood that people are complicated. That you can be angry at someone and still recognize their humanity. He smiled. She argued with Patricia for 20 years, but she also baked her cookies every Christmas. "Did you know that?" Sarah blinked. "What?" "Every Christmas. Dropped them on Patricia's porch anonymously, but I saw her doing it once." When I asked why, Linda said, "Because Patricia Hendricks may be a pain in my ass, but she loves this neighborhood. And that deserves acknowledgement." Frank squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "You're more like your aunt than you know." As the crowd thinned, Patricia approached Sarah. They hadn't spoken since that night in Linda's living room. "Thank you," Patricia said simply. "For the plaque. For Derek's restitution. For treating me like a human being instead of a monster." "You're not a monster," Sarah said. "You're just someone who forgot that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around." Patricia nodded. "I've spent 2 weeks thinking about what to do next. I'm leaving Meadowbrook. Moving to Arizona, near my sister. I need distance from this place to figure out who I am without the HOA to define me." "That sounds healthy. But before I go, I wanted to give you something." Patricia handed Sarah an envelope. "Linda gave this to me in 2019, after one of our arguments. She said to open it if she died before settling our property dispute. I never opened it. I was too afraid of what it would say. But I think you should have it." Sarah took the envelope, hands trembling. Patricia walked away without another word. Sarah watched her reunite with Derek, watched them leave together, a mother and son beginning the long process of healing. Tom appeared at Sarah's elbow. "You going to open that?" "Not here." Sarah tucked the envelope into her purse. "Come on. Let's go home and feed Casanova. He's been cooped up all morning, and he's probably plotting revenge." They drove back to 847, Meadowbrook Lane in comfortable silence. The house looked different somehow, less like a burden and more like a home. Casanova greeted them at the back door, pecking affectionately at Tom's hand and ignoring Sarah completely. "He likes you better," Sarah complained. "I feed him treats." "You feed him regular food. Basic bird economics." Inside, Sarah made coffee while Tom distributed Tom's cookies on a plate. Only then did she open Patricia's envelope. Linda's handwriting filled the single page inside. "Dear Patricia," it read. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll probably be relieved. We've been at war so long that neither of us remembers what peace looks like. But I want you to know something, I never hated you. I hated your methods. I hated your rigidity. I hated the way you treated people like problems to be solved instead of neighbors to be understood. But I never hated you. Because underneath all that need for control, I saw someone who genuinely loves this neighborhood. Someone who's terrified of losing it. Someone who's forgotten that the tighter you grip something, the faster it slips away. You can't control community into existence, Patricia. You can only create the conditions for it to grow. I hope, after I'm gone, you'll learn that lesson. I hope you'll find a way to lead with compassion instead of compliance. And I hope you'll forgive yourself for being human. We all make mistakes. The trick is learning from them. With more affection than you'd probably believe, Linda." Sarah set down the letter. She forgave Patricia. Years ago. She just never told her. "Some forgiveness works better as a gift for after you're gone," Tom said quietly. "No pressure for reconciliation, no awkward conversations. Just grace. Sarah looked around Linda's kitchen, her kitchen now. At the ostrich visible through the window. At the stack of HOA documents she'd been organizing. At the future stretching out before her, uncertain but full of possibility. "I'm running for the board," she said suddenly. Tom smiled. "I know. And I'm going to make changes. Real changes. No more foreclosures over petty violations. No more harassment of people who don't fit some perfect suburban mold. No more treating homeowners like enemies. I know that too. And I'm keeping Casanova. Forever. Even if he chases every delivery driver in the neighborhood. That goes without saying." Tom raised his coffee mug. "To Linda Mitchell. Who left you a hell of a legacy." Sarah clinked her mug against his. "To Aunt Linda. And to the messy, complicated work of building community." 3 months later, Sarah won her board election by a landslide. Her first act was to propose a complete overhaul of the HOA bylaws, establishing clear limits on fines, mandatory appeals processes, and protections for properties that predated the HOA's incorporation. It passed unanimously. Her second act was to organize a neighborhood barbecue at Linda Mitchell Memorial Park, where she encouraged every resident to bring their quirks, their pets, their personalities, whatever made them human. Casanova attended as the guest of honor, wearing a bow tie and stealing hot dogs from unsuspecting children. No one complained. The ostrich had become the neighborhood mascot, a symbol of the community's evolution from rigid conformity to chaotic, joyful acceptance. Derek Hendricks moved back to Meadowbrook 6 months later, buying a small house on the South End. He and Patricia had family dinners every Sunday, rebuilding their relationship one awkward conversation at a time. The events company lease generated enough revenue to fund 3 years of infrastructure repairs. Property values rose. Homeowner satisfaction scores went up. And slowly, grudgingly, the neighborhood became what Linda had always wanted, a real community. Sarah never forgot the day she'd inherited a house, an ostrich, and a fight she hadn't asked for. But she'd learned that sometimes the best inheritances aren't the easy ones. Sometimes they're the ones that force you to become someone stronger, kinder, and more resilient than you ever thought possible. And sometimes, justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about finding the grace to see your enemies as people, your struggles as opportunities, and your aunt's ridiculous ostrich as the best security system money can't buy. Casanova chased 2 more HOA inspectors over the next year. But this time, Sarah just laughed, poured them lemonade, and welcomed them to the chaos. It was, after all, what Linda would have wanted.